In this tutorial, I'm going to discuss completing the square, and we're going to do it in more of a classical way that you do it in one of your classes as well. So I'm going to take this equation and set it equal to 0. That's x squared minus 6x. And our focus is on that 6 right there. And the very first thing we do when we want to complete the square is we take that 6 times 1/2. And this is equal to 3. We take that 3 and we square it. So now 3 squared, and that equals 9. We take that 9 and add it to both sides of that equation above. So I take plus 9 on the left-hand side and plus 9 on the right-hand side of the equation, which gives me x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals to 9. Factor this, and it would be x minus 3 squared is equal to 9. And if I solve for x, I would get x is equal to 0 and x is equal to 6. A lot of people don't know why completing the square works, but if I take that distance there, that distance is 6, the width of the parabola at that point. Now if I take half of that distance, that equals 3. And that's my midpoint between those two edges of the parabola right there. Now I calculate the distance from that point to the minimum of the graph. And it turns out that if I take the 3 and square it, that distance is 9. So I take 1/2 times 6. And now I square that whole thing. That gives me 9. And again, that's the distance from the x-axis to the bottom of the parabola. Now let me graph this again. These two dots I put in right now is where the graph crosses the x-axis, or where that equation equals 0. And when I add 9 to both sides of the equation, what I'm doing is I'm shifting that curve up 9 units to right there. And now I set the equation equal to 9. It turns out the x values, or the solution to the graph, is the same for the top graph, the one I'm drawing now, as the graph I drew before. So notice the x values are the same. 0 on both, which is a solution to both equations, and 6. So if I slide it down 9, you'll see that the solution there is the same as the solution there. So let me put the first equation back in, the one I started with, and it's x squared minus 6, and that's the solution. Now I'm actually going to solve for this equation, and when I solve, I set it equal to 9. So I'm solving or finding those 2 points, the x values for those 2 points. So I have x minus 3 times x minus 3 if I factored that equation. This all equals 9. So I have x minus 3 squared is equal to 9. And now I'm going to solve this equation, continue on with that. So if I take the square root of both sides of this equation, and also the square root of 9. So I have x minus 3 on the left-hand side, and this is equal to plus or minus 3. So now I have x minus 3 is equal to plus 3, and x minus 3 is equal to minus 3. Now I'm going to solve for x, so I add plus 3 to both sides of the equation to get rid of the negative 3 on the left-hand side, which gives me x is equal to 6, which is one solution. And x minus 3 is equal to negative 3, so I add 3 again to both sides of the equation, trying to isolate my x. So I have x is equal to 0. And those are the two solutions. So if I have x is 0 and x is 6, we put a 0 and 6. If I plug those into that equation, x squared minus 6x plus 9, it will equal 9. And if I plug those values into the original equation, which is x squared minus 6x, it would equal 0. Y would equal 0 in that case. When I completed the square, I came up with a new equation, which is the x squared minus 6x plus 9 is equal to 9. And the solutions for both these equations, the x values are the same. So I'm always trying to find x. So up next is a little bit more complex equation. I'm adding a 5 to it, so I have x squared minus 6x plus 5. And I'll show you how to solve that equation in the next video.